He wants us to live the kind of life when we're connected to the vine, when things happen naturally and organically. You know, when the vine produces fruit, you don't see it like straining and struggling trying to produce fruit. It just happens naturally. These supernatural fruit happens naturally, right? Because it's getting all of the nutrients from the vine. All the vine is supplying all what the branches need to produce whatever kind of fruit comes out. What's the branch's job? Be a branch. Receive from the vine. Stay attached to the vine. Keep receiving from the vine. That's the branch's job. Stay connected. When I look at this passage is really helpful picture for us, when we think about it. And I want to give you an example that happened to me last year during 2020. And it was in April of 2020 that the Lord called me. And it's interesting, I was just kind of reading through the Bible like I normally do every year. And I was reading about Jesus' resurrection and how he was on the earth for 40 days until he got ascended back into heaven. And then the Lord pointed out, there's 40 days after his ministry. There was also 40 days before he started his ministry. It's kind of like a bookend, right? And the Lord told me, go back and look at the 40 days before he started his ministry. So I go back and turn back in the pages and then look at the beginning before Jesus started his ministry. And those 40 days, what happened? It says, the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted, and he fasted and prayed for 40 days and for 40 nights. Okay? And I was like, wow, that was the beginning of his ministry. He was in the wilderness for 40 days. And then Jesus told me, that's what I want you to do. I want you to fast for 40 days. Now, I mentioned before that I fasted a couple times for 40 days. So in 2018, it was the first time he asked me to fast for 40 days, okay? And that was very hard. The longest I had ever fasted before was 7 days, and that was only one time. Before that, it was maybe 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. That's the longest I've ever fasted. Fasting and me did not go together, okay? It was not easy for me to do. I shared before that food is my love language, right? I love food. I love eating. So when the Lord asked me to fast, it's not something that I'm jumping at and rejoicing over doing. Right? So when he asked me to do that first 40-day fast, I was very, very fearful. Very, very fearful going into that first fast in 2018. But I felt like the Lord was doing something significant in my life. Right? And it took me a lot of courage. It took me 3 weeks to say yes to it. But at the end of 3 weeks, I said yes, and I'm going to do the 40-day fast. At the end of that 40-day fast, the Lord started speaking things to me. And that 40-day fast was interesting because it was actually the easiest fast that I ever did. Easier than some one-day fast, right? You might think, okay, really? Really? Seriously? But it was true. That 40-day fast was one of the easiest fasts I ever did. At the end of the 40 days, one of the things the Lord was telling me was, look how dependent upon me you were every day, right? Because when you're fasting for 40 days, trust me, you're very dependent on the Lord. Right? So I was very dependent on God to go throughout these 40 days. And then what he told me was, after I was saying, God, it was so good, I really felt I was so dependent on you every day. He told me, this is true every day. Not just when you're fasting. It's when you're fasting that you suddenly realize what's true all the time. You're always dependent upon me. It took the fast for you to realize it. It took the fast for you to start recognizing the truth of what was happening all the time. You're always dependent upon me like this all the time. And so I was remembering that time when I went into this second 40-day fast last year. And so the beginning of the fast, it started out like this passage, like in John 15:3, where it talked about pruning, okay, and addressing the flesh, okay? And the Lord gave me this picture of this pruning, okay, and it was this. Okay, so this is a garden hose. And if you can look at the picture, there's a problem with the hose. What's the problem here? What do you see? It's got two big kinks in it. Okay? So this is actually my hose in the front. This is my hose in the front. And then whenever I try to use it, it kind of kinks up like that. And what happens? You turn the water on, full power, and then what's coming out? It's just dribbling. It's dribbling out. Okay, so when I look at this hose, what's really the problem? Is the problem that there's not enough water? Is there a problem with the water pressure? Is there a problem with how much power is coming out? No, the problem is these kinks in the hose that I can't fully receive the power that's coming out. This was the picture he gave me of the pruning. The pruning is taking the kinks out so you can fully receive from the vine. If you think about the vine illustration, when it's got stuff there that doesn't belong, it prevents God's Spirit from coming through. It prevents his life coming through. It prevents his love coming through so you can produce the fruit that he wants you. So he was looking at this picture and he gave me that image and saying, I'm taking the kinks out. So I said, okay, let's go through the kinks. So in the beginning of the fast, and if you've ever fasted, you can relate to this part, the beginning is hard because you're dealing with your flesh, right? You're used to depending on yourself. You're used to depending on food for your sustenance and your strength and your energy. In the beginning, you're not eating anything. You can't do that. So in the beginning, it was a struggle, right? And I'm going through and I'm struggling. It was a lot different from my first 40-day fast. It was much more difficult. I was struggling. And I felt like the Lord saying, I am purging things that are preventing you from receiving from me. I'm taking things out that shouldn't be there so you can feel the flow. And you could be like this hose where it's actually receiving the full power of what the Spirit is supposed to bring.